Take a trip back in time and rediscover the discontinued snacks from the 1970s that fueled childhood and sugar rushes. These forgotten favorites deserve a comeback because some flavors never go out of style. Developed by Pillsbury for NASA, Space Food Sticks hit stores in the early 1970s. They promised kids a taste of the future. These chewy, tube-shaped snacks came in flavors like peanut butter, chocolate, and caramel, and were marketed as nutritional balanced energy boosters. But let's be honest, most kids ate them because they were cool and futuristic. Why was that important? Because the space race was still a household name, and astronaut food felt like being part of a moon mission. They were compact, fun, and oddly filling. Children packed them in their lunchboxes or smuggled them into their school bags for snacks. Over time, as nutritional labels became stricter and tastes changed, the Space Food Sticks quietly disappeared from orbit. But for those who remember, one bite conjured dreams of weightlessness, silver foil wrappers, and the feeling that something futuristic was just around the corner. With its braided design and 20 centimeters long, the Marathon Bar was a chocolate lover's dream. Launched by Mars in the early 1970s, it consisted of a ribbon of chewy caramel covered in milk chocolate wrapped in bright red packaging with a ruler attached, just to prove it was really that long. Why was this important? Because it wasn't just a chocolate bar, it was a challenge. Kids would compete to see who could make it last the longest, unrolling each bite like a delicious puzzle. It stood out in a world of square bars, offering equal parts fun and flavor. Over time, its cost, complexity, and sticky texture led to its disappearance until 1981. A similar version still exists in the UK as the Cadbury Curly Wurly, but American kids of the 70s know it's not quite the same. The Marathon Bar wasn't just a snack, it was a playground legend, wrapped in caramel and coated in memories. Kougall wasn't your average peanut butter. Launched by Kraft in the early 70s, it came in fancy jars and wild flavors like banana, cinnamon, vanilla, and chocolate. Aimed squarely at kids, the spreadable treat featured a mascot that looked like a goggle-eyed cartoon alien. Why was this important? Because it suddenly made boring sandwiches cool. Whether on toast, crackers, or eaten straight from the jar, Kougall was a dessert disguised as lunch. It also had that groovy brand and name that perfectly matched the playful side of the decade. Sadly, it faded into obscurity in the late 70s, likely due to changing tastes and the growing health-conscious eating movement. But those who remember it can still taste the chocolate peanut swirl and the joy of having something just for kids in the pantry. Not all sweets came in jars. Some were packaged, fizzing, popping, and exploding with flavor. Let's unwrap a few more forgotten favorites. Long before cereal aisles were flooded with cartoon mascots, Pink Panther flakes were a funky favorite. This sugary cereal, launched by Post in the early 1970s, consisted of pink, strawberry-flavored cornflakes and a box adorned with the urbane, mute Panther himself. Kids were immediately smitten, not just with the color, but also with the sweet, slightly artificial flavor that turned milk a magical shade of pink. Why was this important? Because it felt like a Saturday morning cartoon to eat. It captured everything playful about the era. Bold colors, funny mascots, and unabashed sweetness. Toward the end of the decade, the cereal quietly disappeared from the scene, likely giving way to other fruit-flavored competitors. But for kids who poured themselves a bowl before watching the Pink Panther show, they were breakfast and entertainment all in one. Pink Panther flakes weren't just cereal, they were a mood. Happy, cheeky, and way cooler than anything beige. Developed by Pillsbury as a competitor to Kool-Aid, funny-faced drink mixes were launched in the late 1960s and exploded in popularity in the 1970s. Each flavor featured a silly cartoon character: Goofy Grape, Rootin' Tootin' Raspberry, Choo Choo Cherry, names that still resonate in nostalgic minds today. These powdered drinks were sold in colorful cans and later in foil pouches. Why was this important? Because kids loved drinking a drink that felt like it was made for them. The characters were funny, the flavors were bold, and the sugar content immeasurable. As times changed, so did attitudes toward artificial colors and mascots, and some characters were removed due to cultural insensitivity. The entire product line was eventually discontinued in the early 1980s. But for those who remember, a sip of grape or cherry immediately conjures up images of summer picnics, sticky fingers, and the thrill of pouring just a little more powder into the pitcher. Ever stirred a pitcher of Funny Face or begged for a Marathon Bar at the checkout? Let us know which discontinued snack you're still dreaming of. Long before squeezable yogurt and pudding cups filled cafeteria trays, there was Danka. Sold in foil-sealed plastic cups, Danka pudding snacks were a brief but memorable fixture in 1970s lunchboxes. They came in chocolate, vanilla, butterscotch, and even banana flavors, each incredibly smooth and just rich enough to taste like a real dessert. Why was this important? Because it gave kids a grown-up treat in a kid-sized package. The colorful labels and leak-proof packaging made them perfect for throwing in a school bag or keeping in the refrigerator drawer as an after-school treat. Danka didn't last long. It was eclipsed by Jell-O's later dominance of the pudding cup market. But for a few sweet years, it was the gold standard for creamy, portable indulgence. No mixing, no fuss, just peel, scoop, and smile. From puddings to puffs, the next snacks were crispy, crumbly, and packed with flavor that disappeared as quickly as they landed on your lunch tray. General Mills introduced pizza spins in the late 1960s, and although they disappeared by the mid-1970s, their unique taste still inspires cravings. These baked snacks, shaped like little spoked wheels, were loaded with tomatoes, oregano, cheese, and spices. Basically, crispy pizza. Why was this important? Because it brought a trendy food, pizza, to snack breaks in a whole new way. Kids who had never eaten at a pizzeria could now nibble on something almost identical to the real thing. Pizza spins were light, crispy, and addictive. Unfortunately, they couldn't compete with chips and pretzels, and their distinct flavor made them harder to sell to a wider audience. But for the 70s kids who loved them, they were perfection in a box. Bold, savory, and just unusual enough to be unforgettable. Many have tried to copy the taste, but nothing compares to the original. It wasn't just a snack, it was a crispy pizza. The Choco Light bar was one of Nestlé's most interesting textural experiments. Launched in the 1970s, it stood out thanks to its airy, bubbly texture, which gave each bite a smooth, melt-in-the-mouth sensation. Wrapped in shiny brown foil with bold orange lettering, the bar looked modern and tasted futuristic. Why was that important? Because it redefined what chocolate could be. Instead of dense and rich, it was airy, smooth, and full of texture. It felt special, almost scientific, like something out of Willy Wonka's workshop. While similar concepts like the Aero bar still exist in Europe, the Choco Light disappeared from American shelves in the 1980s, never to return. Fans still search for imitators, but few live up to the nostalgia. It wasn't just about the taste, it was the feeling. The way it slowly dissolved, the faint crackle when you bit into it. In a sea of sameness, Choco Light was truly different and deserves a comeback. Long before the Wonka brand became synonymous with nerds and dwarves, the Super Scrunch Bar was a hit. Launched in the mid-1970s, this chocolate bar combined creamy caramel, crunchy peanuts, and a thick chocolate coating. It was like a cross between 100 Grand and a Baby Ruth, but with that whimsical Wonka branding that gave it a magical quality. Why did that matter? Because the name alone was irresistible to kids. Super Scrunch wasn't just a candy, it was an adventure. The bar was heavily promoted with references to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, so biting into it felt like stepping into a golden ticket. Over time, it was quietly discontinued, overshadowed by other Wonka novelties and mainstream bars. For the candy-loving kids of the 70s, however, it was a treat of the highest order. Unwrapping a Super Scrunch Bar wasn't just sweet, it felt like opening a prize. Crunchy, chewy, chocolatey, and gone far too quickly. Not every discontinued snack was sweet. Tuna Twist was a savory seasoning mix that General Foods introduced in the mid-1970s to liven up boring canned tuna. It came in packets with flavors like onion, Italian, and cheddar, and was meant to be simply stirred in. No mayonnaise needed. Why was this important? Because it made weeknight dinners feel like an experiment, in the best way. It gave kids less of a fishy tuna flavor, and it gave busy parents a quick way to try something new. Tuna Twist even had catchy commercials that promised to spruce up your tuna. But with the advancement of convenience foods and the trend toward fresh ingredients, the powdered mix lost its appeal. For many families, however, it was still a staple, transforming even the plainest can into something tasty and fun. Did you choose something sweet like Super Scrunch or something savory like Tuna Twist? Tell us which long-lost snack you would bring back if you had one wish. Named after baseball legend Reggie Jackson, the Reggie Bar hit stores in the late 1970s and became an instant hit. It combined peanuts, caramel, and a thick milk chocolate coating, basically a round Snickers bar without the nougat. The packaging was as loud as a stadium cheer, bold orange letters with Reggie's signature. Why was this important? Because it blurred the line between sports and snacks. Kids didn't just eat it, they collected the wrappers, quoted the ads, and associated it with home runs and heroics. It was often tossed to fans at Yankee Stadium after Reggie hit a home run, adding to its mystique. Sadly, it disappeared after Jackson's retirement, resurfaced briefly in the 90s, and then disappeared for good. But for a few years, the Reggie Bar was more than just a candy. It was culture, sweet, gooey, and packed with peanuts. It tasted like fame itself. Next up, cheese puffs, candy canes, and cookie snacks so good they should be banned, or at least harder to share. With a name like Screaming Yellow Zonkers, how could this popcorn snack not turn heads? Launched by Lincoln Snacks in the early 1970s, the company offered sugar-glazed popcorn in a bright yellow box covered in absurd, hilarious lettering. The taste was sweet and buttery, like caramel popcorn with a lighter crunch. Why was this important? Because it was one of the first snacks marketed with humor and attitude. The packaging didn't just contain popcorn, it entertained the visitors. Kids would read the jokes aloud at sleepovers, recite them during recess, and save the boxes long after the last corn was gone. Screaming Yellow Zonkers didn't last into the 80s, likely replaced by flashier, saltier options. But for those who remember, the name alone conjures up a flood of sugar and silliness. It wasn't just the snack that was memorable, it was the entire experience. Colorful boxes, crunchy bites, and the feeling of knowing the joke every time you opened one. Although it technically survived until the early 90s, PB Max arrived in the late 70s as a promising contender in the peanut butter snack wars. It featured a thick layer of peanut butter on a crispy cookie base, completely covered in milk chocolate. Why was that important? Because it was compact and filling and somehow still felt like a treat your mom would approve of, at least in comparison. Easy to compare to chocolate bars. PB Max was also marketed to adults, making it seem cooler than traditional children's snacks. Despite strong sales, Mars pulled the plug, reportedly because some executives simply didn't like peanut butter. Yes, seriously, PB Max disappeared from shelves almost overnight and became a snack legend. For fans, it was the holy grail of sweet and salty flavors, cookie, candy, and protein boost all rolled into one. It may have peaked early, but it left a big, peanut buttery hole in our hearts. Keebler's Magic Middles were bite-sized shortbread cookies with a gooey fudge or peanut butter filling hidden inside like buried treasure. They debuted in the late 1970s and became a favorite with kids who craved a snack with a surprise. Each soft, buttery cookie looked plain on the outside, until you bit into it. Why was that important? Because it was a sweet little secret you could rediscover again and again. The chocolate version melted in your mouth, while the peanut butter version had just the right amount of salt. By the early 2000s, the Magic Middles were gone, but their legacy lives on in online petitions, copycat recipes, and nostalgic cravings. No other cookie struck that balance between crumbly and creamy. They weren't garish or colorful, but they were magical. Before it evolved into Fun Dip, Lick Maid was a simpler, messier thrill. It came in little paper bags filled with flavored colored powder, grape, cherry, orange, and lime. No candy canes, no frills, just pure sugar and flavor. Why was that important? Because it felt rebellious. You poured it on your tongue, dipped your finger in it, or poured the whole thing into a water bottle like homemade lemonade. The tangy, sweet, and sour taste made you wince and then smile. Kids used it like currency, traded flavors, or saved it for after school. Eventually, the product was renamed Fun Dip, complete with a candy cane for dipping, but longtime Lick Maid fans swear it was better raw. It was messy, sure, but it was also wild and free. In a world of pre-measured snacks and resealable packages, Lick Maid was pure chaos, and that's why we loved it. Have you ever sneaked a Magic Middle or poured Lick Maid directly into your mouth? Tell us your favorite snack from the mid-70s. You know, the one you'd give up your lunch for. Although they made brief reappearances in later decades, the original Chocodile of the 1970s was something special. A chocolate-covered Twinkie that offered the best of both worlds, fluffy yellow cake and rich chocolate frosting. Why was that important? Because it was a portable, pre-packaged dessert that somehow managed to feel like a bit of an indulgence. For kids, they were the grown-up version of Twinkies, richer, messier, and a bit forbidden. The chocolate had a crunchy flavor, the cake was soft, and the whole thing could be devoured in 3 bites. Regional availability and production changes led to their disappearance from store shelves, although a version was revived in the 2010s. Longtime fans, however, argue that the consistency and taste never quite matched the original. Maybe it was nostalgia, maybe it was the old recipe. For many, the classic Chocodile remains unsurpassed. It was a lunchtime treat, a lunchbox surprise, and a midnight snack in an irresistible slice of cake and chocolate. Bring it on. No ifs, ands, or buts. Before cheese powder became its own food group, there was Brims cheese popcorn. Sold in bright orange and yellow bags, this savory snack was ultra cheesy, ultra orange, and ultra addictive. Why did that matter? Because it was everywhere, from corner stores to gas stations, and your fingers looked like they'd been dipped in radioactive cheddar. The flavor was intense, tart, salty, and somehow sharper than other popcorn brands. Brims didn't hold back. Children licked the cheese powder off their fingers as if it were dessert, and at the bottom of the bag was always a veritable treasure trove of cheese powder, which was also a flavor bomb. Over time, as larger snack brands gained the upper hand, Brims faded into regional obscurity and was eventually discontinued. But for those who were, there was nothing comparable to the cheese chaos of Brims. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't healthy, it was a neon orange joy in a crackling bag, and we'd eat it again in a heartbeat. When it launched in 1976, Hershey's Bar None promised to tame the chocolate monster, and for a few glorious years, it succeeded. This multi-textured bar combined chocolate wafers, a layer of chocolate filling, and crushed peanuts, all covered in a thick layer of chocolate. It was a crunch lover's dream. Why was that important? Because it was complex without being confusing. Every bite offered you crunch, cream, nuttiness, and melt-in-the-mouth flavor all at once. It stood out from the simpler bars of the time, and the packaging, black with bold orange and white, gave it a high-end, fancy look. In the late 1980s, Hershey released a new label with 2 bars and a different formula, and shortly thereafter, it disappeared from store shelves. But fans still talk about the original Bar None like it's the king of chocolate. It didn't just satisfy your sweet tooth, it surpassed it. 1 bar, all textures, total chocolate dominance. Next up, candy shells, cookies with faces, and snacks that seemed more like cartoons than food. But we couldn't get enough. Oompas were Willy Wonka's version of the peanut butter M&Ms, but with a louder personality. These colorful, sugar-coated discs came in eye-catching packaging and had a creamy peanut butter and chocolate filling. Launched in the mid-1970s by the Willy Wonka brand, then owned by Breaker Confections, they were chewy, rich, and just a little larger than the average chocolate button. Why was this important? Because Oompas weren't just candy, they were fun. Everything about them, from their name to their brightly colored shells, made them feel like they were part of the Wonka universe. Kids loved the pop of color, the soft interior, and the way the icing crunched perfectly between their teeth. Despite their popularity, Oompas were discontinued in the early 1980s and replaced by a fruit-flavored version that never really caught on. For peanut butter fans, their disappearance remains a sore spot. In a world of possibilities, the Oompas were ahead of their time, and far more exciting than plain old candy shells. If you remember a cookie that once smiled at you, it was probably Nabisco Giggles. These double-sided cookies debuted in the late 70s and featured a sweet cream filling and 2 smiling cookie faces on either side, as if a cartoon character had smashed your lunchbox. They came in vanilla and chocolate flavors and were clearly intended to compete with Oreos, but with more personality. Why was this important? Because kids loved food with humor. Giggles weren't just delicious, they were funny. Biting into a face was a mischievously emotional and unforgettable feeling. The flavor was bold, the crunch satisfying, and the design pure joy. Despite a huge fan base, Giggles were discontinued in the early 90s and haven't returned since. But their legend lives on in retro snack forums and collector sites. Cookies may be everywhere these days, but none have ever grinned at you like Giggles. Did you love the peanut butter Oompas, the cookie grin of Giggles, or the hearty crunch of Bar None? Share your favorite snack in the comments. These weren't just crackers, they were statement snacks. Nabisco's Swiss cheese crackers, which launched in the mid to late 1970s, had holes like real Swiss cheese and a tangy, nutty flavor. Their thin, crisp texture was perfect with soda, lunch, or just snacking 1 handful at a time. Why was that important? Because they looked grown up but tasted fun. Kids liked the odd shape, adults liked the taste, and somehow both kept reaching for the same box. They weren't flashy, but they were incredibly addictive. They had that perfectly salty crunch that made you think, just one more, until the box mysteriously emptied. Despite a cult following, Nabisco discontinued production in the early 1990s, possibly due to competition from more daring snack trends. Yet they've remained a white whale in the snack world. Some fans even try to recreate them from scratch. Finally, one last treat. Shortbread, jelly, and a childhood dream. Born bake into a jammy, golden bite. Sunshine Biscuits, later acquired by Keebler, launched Yum Yums in the 1970s, a biscuit that combined crispy shortbread with a sweet jelly filling. Similar to butter cookies but perfectly packaged, Yum Yums came in flavors like raspberry and strawberry and with a shiny jewel-like filling that caught the eye. Why was this important? Because they felt special, like a cross between a snack and a dessert. Grandmas kept them in cookie tins. Kids hoarded them in plastic bags. The texture contrast, crispy, buttery biscuit with a sticky sweet jelly filling, was just right. Over time, Yum Yums quietly disappeared from store shelves, victims of brand consolidation and changing snack trends. Yet fans still mention them online with the kind of affection usually reserved for pets or one's first car. They weren't the flashiest snack on this list, but they were reliable, delicious, and sorely missed. If you could bring back only one snack, Giggles, Yum Yums, or Swiss cheese crackers, which would it be? Vote for the ultimate comeback snack in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this nostalgic snack binge. Which treat deserves a second chance? Tell us what you miss most, and we'll keep the memories and the cravings alive. See you next time.